Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The big talking point of Friday practice in Singapore. Where exactly has Red Bull's pace gone? Only the 5th fastest team today in qualifying simulations on a weekend where, let's not forget, Technical Directive 018 has been introduced. Reports of the last few days said it would hurt Red Bull and benefit Ferrari. That is what we're seeing so far this weekend. Is it too early to say that Red Bull have fallen off because of this TD? Probably yes, but this does definitely seem like the best chance of the season for a team to actually stop Red Bull and Verstappen's victory streak. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Now, first of all, lots of updates actually on the helmet Marko Drama. You guys know the comments he made on Perez a couple of weeks ago. Now, as I said yesterday, I was kind of surprised that more drivers, team principals hadn't been asked about this because mainly they were asking Lewis Hamilton. And Verstappen did give some comment on the matter actually, as did Christian Horner, who said the reason why Red Bull Racing haven't given a statement on this to condemn it effectively is because Helmut Marko doesn't work for Red Bull Racing. He's part of the wider Red Bull group. So that's why we haven't issued an apology as Red Bull Racing, which is maybe fair enough, but the problem is that he actually, while he might not work for Red Bull Racing technically with the way the organisation is structured, he is listed as an officer or like a director for Red Bull Racing Limited. People found this up on Companies House. So, I'm not really sure that argument exactly checks out to me, and it's just been said actually by Sky Sports News that Helmut Marko has received an official written warning and been reminded of his responsibilities as a public figure by the FIA in line with the FIA Code of Ethics. So lots of discussion on this over the last few days. I guess good at least that the FIA are acknowledging that, well, those comments were said and they shouldn't have been, and therefore issuing a response as a result. Now, this weekend in Singapore, there are so many upgrades, it's almost unbelievable. Red Bull have a couple of things, a change to the rear wing end plate that we discussed yesterday, and also to the floor edge. I believe there's only one of these upgraded floors per Red Bull, so maybe Verstappen had it in FP1 and Perez had it in FP2, but there's also been some talk with regard to Technical Directive 018. They've had to make some changes on the floor. That was the rumour, and the belief was that it would affect the balance of the setup of some of the cars, and the Ferrari was apparently going to get away with no changes, and so far we have seen that kind of play out in reality. So these are all the changes, by the way. So much for McLaren. A lot of these changes actually aren't on Piastri's car yet, but they are on Norris's car, and the McLaren looks pretty toasty around here as well. Loads of things on the AlphaTauri as well, so, loads of changes here this weekend, and, well, it seems to be affecting positively quite a few of these teams as it stands. Now, FP1 was a pretty interesting session, marred by the death of, Mr. Lizard. I think there was 3 different lizards on the track throughout this session, and the only reason why Leclerc wasn't P1 by a much bigger margin was because I think he got blocked by a lizard in Sector 2 of his fastest lap attempt. So, yeah, it seems like they come out in the earlier session of the day, so maybe they'll get away with it tomorrow in the kind of evening session, which is when qualifying is run, and that's why FP2 is likely to have been more representative, because those are the track conditions and the temperatures and, the night session where qualifying and the race will be run. Alonso eventually killed, unfortunately. You see him running over right here, so unfortunately Alonso took out one of these lizards, so it bit the dust on the day, and we could see that after the fact too, unfortunately. So that was really the big talking point of free practice 1, but it was kind of clear from early on that it wasn't just Red Bull dominating. Now, Verstappen was only about a 10th off the pace here in FP1, but that changed quite considerably into the evening. And if we look at FP1 sector times, Ferrari quickest in all sectors, and if it wasn't for that sector 2 that was affected by the lizard for Leclerc, they would have been fastest by about 5/10, and this is what it looked like. Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston were kind of nowhere in first practice. Second practice though, Alonso really turned up the heat. So if you guys haven't heard about this yet, this weekend a new technical directive implemented, which also doubles down on TD39. The belief is that certain teams were finding ways around the flexible floor thing, and now they're going to double down on that further and reduce some of the flexibility of the wings. The argument on the last few days on this, especially from Formula Uno, said that Ferrari are pretty confident they're not going to have to change anything. Red Bull, Mercedes, and maybe McLaren to a lesser extent will be affected. And while this might be affecting performance to some degree, I think the bigger issue, especially for Red Bull today, was getting the balance correct. If you have to change parts of your car on the floor, the wings, whatever, it's going to mess up the balance that you've been dealing with the entire season. So, just looking at what we thought might happen because of this new TD and what we have seen today with both Perez and Verstappen struggling with the balance, especially at the rear of the car, does make you wonder whether this has had an effect. Now, I do think it's too early to say whether Red Bull are, they're just not going to turn up tomorrow and Verstappen's going to get pole by 6/10. But that doesn't feel like it's going to happen. And if there's any weekend where Red Bull could be beaten, this is looking like the best chance for it's actually looking like Ferrari, although their long run pace is a little bit different, and we'll get into that here in a second. So FP2 was really interesting, and I've got to say, Carlos Sainz, man, he has been on the pace lately. I know he made a comment to the media actually today saying that he feels more confident in this car now than he really ever has in a Ferrari, especially relative to Leclerc, and it's actually difficult to say who the number one driver is at Ferrari right now, because Sainz and Leclerc are, when they're putting in lap times, it's very similar to Russell and Hamilton, Russell and Hamilton last season, this season, they're putting in laps one after another. They're going like within a tenth of each other, right? So you know what the car is capable of. Now Leclerc and Sainz are doing the same thing. They're really close-knit. It's impressive to see from Sainz. And with some of the early laps coming in on the mediums, these were the type of times that we were seeing with Leclerc doing a 1:32.9 on those medium tyres. Actually, the AlphaTauri was looking kind of racy as well. But we can see on the left-hand side, okay, at this point of the session, not especially representative, but the Ferrari being quickest is representative. And this is what Perez had to say on the radio with about 20 or so minutes to go. It's just not coming into position, mate. Every braking zone, I feel like I'm going to crash. The rear is just stepping up massively. So balance issues on that Red Bull, no doubt. And Verstappen was struggling with this. Perez was struggling with this as well. And they were, in the qualifying runs, 7-8 tenths off the pace. Now, in the race simulations, it's a different story. But we know the qualifying is massively important around here. The Red Bull typically gains like 6-7 tenths, if not more, in race trim anyway. Like, it's just so good in the race. So maybe it makes sense if they're 7 tenths off in quali, they'll be the same race pace or something like that. But if you were to qualify, let's say Red Bull do qualify 7th and 8th, which seems highly unlikely. I think they'll be much higher up than that. But if you don't qualify on the front row or P3, P4, your chances to win are very limited at Singapore. It's believed that it's going to be difficult to overtake here this weekend, and I expect that to be the case. And even if you've got a great race car, it doesn't matter at this specific circuit. Qualifying is the most important thing of the weekend still around here, and Red Bull aren't looking in prime position to execute on that. And again, FP2, Ferrari quickest in all sectors. Mercedes were the second fastest car with a great lap from Russell, still about 4 tenths down. Then Alonso, who was looking really good. Then the McLaren, then the Red Bull. So this must be the first time this season that Red Bull have been this far down in qualifying rankings after practice. Now, they've still got another session tomorrow morning to change things up and to learn their lessons overnight, but that FP3 session, as I've said, isn't condition-wise as representative of qualifying as this session was. This is the session where you need to nail it, really, and Red Bull clearly have not. 7 tenths on an ideal lap off the pace of the Ferrari. So if it is just a coincidence that the TD arrives and Red Bull in practice are looking as slow as they have done all season, it's a weird coincidence, to say the very least. There probably is something in this. Now, can they not solve that? They more than likely can. But they were the 7th fastest car in Sector 1 alone, which is kind of remarkable to think about. Now, the long run pace is probably a little bit more interesting here, and usually that's the case on most tracks. But as I say, qualifying is very important at Singapore. There's no doubt about it, and that remains the case last year, and it remains the case this year as well, you would well imagine. So this is the data for Formula Uno, looking at all the laps that were done on the long run pace towards the end of the session. So the Ferraris, it was quite interesting because they're the fastest over a single lap, but over their long run pace, it wasn't quite as competitive. And actually, the degradation for Sainz especially, or for Leclerc especially, sorry, for Sainz it was pretty good. But for Leclerc, he started out doing a 38.1, finished out doing a 39.1. And to be fair, it wasn't too dissimilar for Russell, but generally, he kept his lap times much lower. So Leclerc's tyre deg on those mediums wasn't looking great. But again, if you qualify P1, P2, it might not matter because no one's going to overtake anyway, possibly. Leclerc was, or Sainz was looking pretty good. Hamilton and Russell both looking pretty tasty. I mean, they were averaging 38.4, 38.5 over the laps that they ran. And let's look at the Red Bulls. So Perez was actually the fastest overall, a 38.2, but that was only over about 5 laps. Verstappen did about 6 or 7 laps and he averaged a 38.6. So, and I think maybe Perez was the one with the new floor here, so maybe there's something in that. And also, it's a street track. Perez won it last year. He's looking pretty good so far. But, not that many laps for the degradation to kind of kick in. But he was up there with Alonso, and Alonso was the other guy with some really tasty lap times here for Aston Martin. So in terms of race pace, it's really tough to call. Red Bull aren't 5-6 tenths ahead like they normally are at this time of the weekends. They're on pace, if not slightly off the pace in Verstappen's case. Whereas all of Alonso, Hamilton, Russell, both the Ferraris, and also Norris, let's not count out Norris because he was looking really good today. He was on the soft tier though, so slightly difficult to say whether, where he would have slotted in, but he was averaging a 38.2, so, similar to what the guys on the mediums were doing, which might make sense over a stint of a few laps or so. So that's pretty much what we have for now. What can Red Bull change overnight? I don't know. But Verstappen doesn't seem especially happy with this. I mean, he straight up said afterwards, Ferrari are quick, that's a big gap to close, and we're just way worse than we expected, right? I mean, if we look at the data, the fact that Ferrari in both sessions really were like 4-5 tenths up in terms of qualifying pace, that is a tough gap to close when the field is looking as tight as it presently is. And if it's a Ferrari 1-2, even if Verstappen's third, that's a big challenge to actually win the race, unless Red Bull pull a strategy masterclass, which they well could, and it's Singapore. Safety cars, red flags, monsoon-like rains, who knows what's going to happen, right? It could be very interesting.
We'll try to, of course, improve it. It's quite a big gap.
Are you surprised by how fast everyone else or how close everyone else is to you at the minute?
Ferrari is very fast. I think we're just way worse than we expected.
All right, well, best of luck.
But if there is a weekend where it's looking like Red Bull are beatable, this has got to be the weekend, right? And as Max says, it's been worse than expected. We have a lot of work to do tonight. We'll try and improve, but that's a big difference. Checo said it's tough with the rear, especially in FP2. We expected Ferrari to be strong. We want to close the gap, but it's going to be difficult. So I guess as it stands, it might be Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc favourite for pole position tomorrow. And unless Red Bull really get something sorted overnight, their win streak is very much so in jeopardy. Is that to do with TDO on 8? I think we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see. But if the weekend goes as Friday has done, then further questions on this one will be raised. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.